Hello! We're using this Russian olive today to make a pretty big sign. Before I can start working on it, I first have to remove all of this rot and clean it up. Did you know that Russian olive is actually an invasive species in most places? I also didn't know that these trees could get so thick. I thought they're like a small shrub slash tree kind of thing, but this slab, which is a middle slab, is 22 inches across on average. Now that it's all cleaned up, it's time to actually focus on the design of this board. I'm using a marking knife to cut out the pattern that was sent to me by the client. This itself took about 2 hours to do. Not only did this take a long time, it was really hot outside. I think the thermometer said about 100, 101. Anyway, it was really hot and I was sweating like crazy by the end of this. Time for the most exciting part of this project, the actual wood burning. I'm using a soldering iron to wood burn this slab, mainly because that's all that Home Depot had at the time, and I didn't want to wait for one to come in the mail. Now, I have a little bit of time, because this wood burning takes quite a long time to do. I thought I would talk a little bit about the history of this slab. I got this slab of Russian olive from a wood dealer up in Winchester, Idaho, which is way out in the boonies in the Pacific Northwest. This guy chops down and air dries all of them stock by himself, which is really quite unique. Most people kiln dry their wood, but I prefer to air dry my wood and work with air dried wood. This is mainly because, unless done perfectly, kiln drying can cause a lot of blending in the colors and reduce or even remove the figuring in the wood. This slab is a good example of this, as even when unfinished, the difference between the light and dark part of the grains is very distinct and very obvious. Russian olive is a really good looking wood to work with in my experience, though I wouldn't really recommend it to any beginners because it is on the softer side of the wood spectrum and you really need to use a mask of some sort when working with it because the sawdust is so nasty. If someone watching this is looking to start woodworking, I would recommend starting with either something cheap like pine or cedar or something hard like oak or walnut. This is because the consequences for messing up with these two categories of wood are much less punishing than if you messed up with an expensive soft wood. When you mess up with standard lumber or such, it's a much cheaper fix than the alternatives because you can just go back to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy a new board or something. When you are working with something hard like walnuts or oak, it's a lot harder to mess up the project because the wood is much more resistant to a lot of accidents and scratches and stuff. Back to the project at hand. This wood burning was definitely an experience that I will remember. It was still over 95 degrees Fahrenheit, or 35 degrees Celsius for you non-Americans out there. And since I have no insulation or heating or cooling in my garage, I was toasty, to say the least. The total time I spent wood burning was a little over 9 hours in total. The dragonfly word took a little over 4 hours. The dragonfly itself took almost 4 hours. And then the final word, which was counseling, took about an hour to wood burn. I definitely wouldn't call myself an expert on wood burning after this project, but I definitely think I learned a thing or two. First off, watch your fingers. I burnt myself quite a few times while working on this with the soldering iron, and man, a 600 degree piece of metal, who would have thought it'd burn your hands, but it burnt mine. Also, depending on what you're doing, it might be better to get an actual wood burning kit, especially if you want to do intricate work. From what I read online, it didn't seem like there was any difference between a smoldering iron and a wood burner, other than the different heads that you could use on a wood burning kit. Just be careful if any of you guys try to wood burn yourself. If you have made it this far, it means that you have probably enjoyed the video up until this point, and it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe to my YouTube channel. When I hit 1,000 subscribers, I will be giving away 2 decorative swords that I have personally made. The first is a dark walnut, hand-and-a-half sword with some vibrant colors towards the top of the blade. And the second, which is a really cool 2-tone piece of dark walnut. To finish this sign, I'm using a water-based varnish, which is supposed to be, I've never used it before, but it's supposed to be pretty weather resistant, and since this sign is going to be outdoors in mild conditions, I figured I should use a pretty durable finish. Now that I'm putting the finish on, you can see why I choose to use this Russian olive quite often, even though it's such a painful wood to work with. The wood is just so beautiful, and these grains are amazing. Almost every single finish I've used on this Russian olive has ended up looking fantastic, even with mediocre finishes like lacquer or polyurethane. So these letters turned out pretty well. I don't know how to feel about the fact that you can see the individual strokes I made with a soldering iron, but other than that, I really like the gloss that it has. It really pops out of the wood. Well, that's trying. It's time to move on to the next step of the construction process. The next step in building the sign is to build the frame that goes on the back of it. This will make it so the client can mount it onto the front of their business. I picked up some steel from my local steel supplier and took it to my family's metal shop. This shop is actually on the Cherry Lane Ranch, which is where I got the name for my business. A lot of my wood I actually source from this ranch. After all the pieces are cut, it's time to relearn how to weld. This clip sums up most of my learning experience. Nah, I missed it completely.
Try again.
I don't know if anybody's noticed, but I think my jacket is pretty fire. Once I felt confident enough that I wouldn't mess it up completely, I tacked all the pieces down on the floor and then moved them to the fabrication table. Once moved to the fabrication table, it's time to magically weld them together. Some of my welds were decent, and others weren't so great. You guys can judge them yourselves in the comment section below. Back at home base, it's time to clean up the frame with the wire wheel. Here comes my favorite transition for this entire video. Let me know if I'm the only one who's done this before with an angle grinder. With the power of my magic spray cans, first primer, and then paint. And now drilling the holes that I forgot to drill before painting the frame, we can then screw it onto the sign. And yes, for anyone who's wondering, this is a pretty old drill press. After spending like 20 minutes making sure it's absolutely level, it's onto the glamour shots. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of the video. And if there's not a video on screen right now, there will be in a few seconds for you to watch.